So, sitting here in my little, I call it my suite here in LaJoy Park, historic LaJoy Park, and Washington D.C. blocks. I mean, literally blocks from Howard Hospital, Howard College, all of this other stuff, and in the hotbed of what is known by Smithsonian as the Afro American Historic Trail of an environment that has actually been the residence of some of the most elite people of color in our history to some degree. And yet, this whole DC experience has gone through so many different transformations. And what we're watching in this new world of gentrification and whatnot is this subtle kind of existence of them gentrifying the residencies that were more than anything else vacant. Literally just space. And so it's not like they're running people out. It's just that what I'm starting to notice is a trend of an old kind of hood value system that is very toxic to its own people and that essence of what still exists in their hood. And in this hood, I'm sitting here 11, almost 12 o'clock, and and untypically, but typically, there's gunplay. And I'm far enough away that I can actually have at least an eyeball sight of at least some of the bits and pieces, not enough to make anything out, but enough to actually view the drama once again occur somewhat after the initial barrage of bullets and whatnot are flying, a distance from me. And normally when I see that, rarely do I ever notice, the ultimate tragedy of all of it, but this time what stood out was the usual suspects that were involved when this kind of gunplay shit between drive-by folks or whatever, was going on with them, this time had a different kind of instinct to it because one of the prime people who seemed to be involved with the whole situation from my distance, and first was in the act of fleeing, and then watching them have some kind of odd kind of sense of humanity enough to go back and pick up what seemed to be some young little girl or young little female. I don't think she was like below teenage age, but not an adult age of sorts. The typical woo woo woo. Hanging out with the fellas, right there outside of their home and whatnot. And only this time, you can obviously see that he had the conviction or the respect for whomever this person was that was affected by their drama, picked her up and carried her, into the building right across the street, and up to the second floor. And I can only imagine how these neighborhood hustling knuckleheads that are of the fame and support of the same dynamic that's still trying to exist with, the least amount of what used to be, flagrant everywhere in this area. And yet, just sitting back, just trying to think of, a scene from like, one of those boys in the hood movies or something when, little cutie so and so is actually, shot down in this drama of yours. A typical day in a broad daylight in the afternoon. Her little ass probably should have been in school or not too. But what stood out was just the watching them literally pick her up and take her inside, knowing exactly where Obama's house or whatnot is, and wondering what do you knock on a door and say to somebody? What do they open the door and deal with at that point? And then realizing that they didn't pull this dude out, you know, uh, as a you know, piece of this drama or whatnot. I mean, they did carry this young girl out, and it's highly possible that I'm praying that that You know, she survives in the whole nine, but what stands out the most is the mere fact that they came out that door with just the body of her. I didn't really notice a whole lot of the typical screaming and, oh, they got so and so and blah, 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 and this, that, and the other. You know, the homages or the, you know, there's so much gunplay over there that, you know, that there's no necessarily tribute to, you know, baby dolls and, you know, liquor bottles and shit like that out, because had that been so, with the amount of traffic that there was, it'd be all over the damn place. Which is really odd, because only in that one little section does it exist, and yet everything else around it is slowly but surely evolving into a more gentrified state that is not as concerned with stopping the violence or this, that, and the other, more so than they're trying to just coexist in what's still here. And in some cases, in a level of respect of the area to which they know that they're possessing too. Only because, you know, this elite group of people of color that invented and harbored this historic area no longer exists in the manner into which they did back when this was, whoo, you know, the people who own these properties were Langston Hughes, and the people who started, you know, many of these frats and sororities and invented and started Howard College and right up the street, and the hospital right up the street, and all of these things. The mayor, even Jesse Jackson, still got a residency right here on this block. King Selassie, not a couple of blocks down there, at one point used to own a little property, used to come up, or that's where he stayed. There's a lot of enriching history that this dirt stands on, but it still try to survive the onslaught of, you know, the 60s, 70s, and 80s that, you know, just really just obliterated all culture and whatnot involved with it. And, well, I've always said that, you know, as a newly found Washingtonian, I'm often amazed at the lack of natives whom have no concern or whatnot to actually exist in the same manner of many of the other places around the country that are in a different kind of social situation that exists here. You know, listening to, you know, the youth. I mean, people would sit back and they say, man, these little kids just sit out in the street and this, that, and the other. I met a couple of these kids. Maybe a couple of these kids have been some of the people that were involved in this gunplay even today. But in talking with them as OG or whatnot, and I'm sitting back there asking them, you know, so, yo, man, so why don't you, you know, come up? I mean, you know, there's so much opportunity here for people of color in this city. You know, what's the problem? Because you seem to be very bright enough to find out that these dudes done did IT training, they can write code, they can do all this other shit. And I'm going, so, but I don't get it, you know? And I think what it is that the people who have the most proof that there's something more to live for some reason, culturally just seem to be, you know, connected in, you know, having to keep a certain real alive, even if it suits no real purpose outside of the mere fact that the one thing about these, you know, street folks and this gunplay and all this other shit that's been occurring a lot there is there's still somehow, some way, more of a need, concern, or resource that exists enough that while they still seem to be posted up in their normal fashion to do, you know, the service that seems to be available, the one thing that doesn't exist as much locally in this neighborhood is the absorption or the saturation or entertainment of the same thing. You know, you don't see crackheads walking around. You don't notice all these things. All you see is transient times and whatnot. So people still feed off of this culture that still exists. But, man, just the thought of sitting here and it's the middle of the day and all I can think about is how so much pain continually occurs right up the street on a daily basis since I've been in this environment. And to imagine the intensity of all of that has existed with the natives enough for them to still be in the state that they are. just want you to think about that, man. I want you to think about the mere fact that sometimes, it's not what's unfixable. It's just the mere fact that, you know, sometimes you kind of wish that, you didn't watch so much of our culture be washed away by neglect of so many others that could have been, more of a sense of pride or purpose just by existing in and around that environment. That's about it, man. I'm gonna let that go because wow, man, life is rather so short or it's really, really long.